one US dollar now buys you 107 Russian rubles, and 1 euro will buy you about 112 Russian rubles. Right now, as I'm shooting this video, it is the 27th of November 2024. It is just after 12 noon here in the eastern part of the European Union, so very close to Russia's border. And not so sure too many people on this side of the border or really on the other side of the border are going to want to hold Russian rubles. So the Russian ruble have been hovering around the 100 Russian ruble to $1 benchmark for quite a number of weeks and months, but now it has gone through that, and it seems that the Russian central bank is no longer going to defend the currency to be around that threshold. And now that it's gone to 107, we don't know exactly yet how low we'll go, but the outlook for the Russian ruble looks extremely bleak. Привет, my name is Connor Klein, and I have a background also in international economics as well as international relations. It is a part of it, and I have been living and continue to live in Ukraine, speak both Ukrainian and Russian. So I'm here to give you a more nuanced and informed analysis of what is happening in the Russo-Ukrainian war. And obviously the economy both in Ukraine and in Russia is central to either side's fortunes in this war. So the Russian ruble and the Russian economy in general has been under a lot of pressure over the last few years. Russia now spends 40% of its budget officially on the war effort plus internal security. That's estimated to be about 7 to 8% of GDP. Those are the official figures. In fact, connected to what has been happening with the ruble, inflation, another core statistic to tell you a lot about an economy's health. Officially, that is at around 9% in Russia. However, today in the Russian newspapers, and remember the Russian media is quite tightly controlled in terms of information, there was a story about how potatoes have increased 75% in the last year. So you may think if you're watching this in the US or somewhere in Western Europe that you have a cost of living crisis, but I doubt it is that to the same extent that your potatoes have gone up 75% in price in the last year. But that seems to be the case in the Russian media. That seems to be what has been happening. And officially, the inflation rate is at 9%, which is already quite high to be an official rate. But perhaps the reality is a lot more severe than we've been led to believe. But one thing that we can definitely tell is the official exchange rate. And it has now crossed that threshold and gone straight through it of 100 rubles to $1 US. And in fact, the interest rate, another core determinant of what is going to be both the inflation rate and to a certain extent it will have an effect on the exchange rate, that is already at 21%. Yes, 21%. That is the interest rate in Russia. And also in the Russian newspapers this morning, there were articles discussing a bit of a debate about whether they are going to increase the interest rate even further to 22 or 23% shortly to try and reduce the money supply, right? Reduce the supply of rubles, right? It's going to be more expensive to borrow money. Of course, that has a negative impact on business because then they can't take out loans in order to finance investments. So that's going to have a knock-on effect on the economy, at least the private sector that's not associated with the war effort. So all in all, it is looking extremely bleak for Russia's economy, which is a key component in its ability to wage war against Ukraine. So this is something that is very pertinent to keep your eye on because Russia has only a certain number of reserves. It is already spending 40% of its budget on both the war and internal security. It is a massive amount. That means they are not investing in other parts of the economy that would be more productive in the long term. You could describe the Russian economy at the moment as being an economy in which you can see Keynesian militarism. This means that it is an economy predominantly functioning due to the war effort. because they are investing so much of their resources into the war, it will show up in official statistics as being GDP growth. That is what officially Russia has been saying. However, the long-term value of producing or refurbishing, in all likelihood, a Soviet-era tank and then sending it to Ukraine with presumably a crew of 4 soldiers that you also had to invest money into training, albeit probably not that much, and it being destroyed within a couple of months of getting there, it is hard to say what is the return on your investment. How much was that tank really worth when you produced it? So this can be very illusionary. Germany in World War II also had great official statistics in the middle of World War II because they were pumping so much money into their war machine. They had a war economy. Russia has been described as something similar, although possibly not a full war economy, but going that direction. And basically, there is a lot of talk about stagflation in Russia. That is a situation where you have very high inflation, sluggish economic growth or non-existent economic growth, and high unemployment. Russia now exhibits 2 of these factors. It has even officially pretty low economic growth, and the reliability of those figures from the Kremlin is also very dubious. And obviously we're seeing inflation officially at 9%, but unofficially the cost of living inflation seems to be way higher. And now that the currency is starting to drop in value quite considerably and they're raising interest rates at the same time, that means that we could see inflation gather pace in Russia because the price of their imports is going to increase. And okay, you'll have a certain amount of import substitution, but the reality is that the Russian government, it would appear to be increasing the money supply in the country, not through lowering interest rates, but possibly by printing more money. That is a logical deduction why inflation is continuing at this pace. The only one of the 3 criteria for stagflation that is not present in the Russian economy is high unemployment. Actually, unemployment is extremely low. It's somewhere between 2 and 3% at the moment. That is very low and very low historically for Russia. And one of the reasons for that is a lot of men in particular are at the front lines. Some of them are obviously dead as a result. Many are injured and therefore not going to be included in an unemployment statistic. If you are invalided from the war, you don't go into those statistics, and there are hundreds of thousands of Russians who fit into that category. So they don't have massive unemployment. They have, if anything, a labor shortage to go work in the factories, to go fight on the front line, hence why you see stories of tens of thousands of North Korean troops having already been sent or potentially are going to be sent to fight with Russia, because this is the one thing that they are obviously struggling with. It is manpower in general. So in fact, having an unemployment rate that is so low is not really a great sign because presumably you're going to need more and more people. Also, when Russia tried mobilization back in the autumn of 2022, that led to a considerable exodus of working age Russians who left the country. Men, primarily men who were of military age, a lot of them left. It could have been around 1 million. Again, these are guys that would have been working in the Russian economy, and when they left, presumably other people stepped into their jobs. However, we see that they have a manpower crisis, a worker crisis, they have a big shortage. So the Russian economy in general is showing signs of creaking. Obviously, they've been under international sanctions since 2014 when they illegally invaded Ukraine the first time and illegally annexed Crimea, and we had the beginnings of a war in the Donbass region of Ukraine, and then in 2022 they obviously extended that invasion by trying to seize the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and they currently occupy about 20% of Ukrainian territory in total illegally. So the sanctions are also going to play a factor on the economy, and over the long term that is obviously having a certain impact even if sanctions don't work perfectly, and there are ways around them. However, those ways around the sanctions also tend to increase the costs for the economy. So all in all, this is a sign that Russia's economy is starting to show signs of extreme tension and pressure. They are under a lot of stress economically, and they seem to have given up trying to keep the ruble at 100 rubles to $1. It may have other consequences going forward, so let's keep an eye on what happens in the next few weeks and months. Donald Trump will take over as US president towards the end of January. He has mooted a potential peace plan. Russia is going, it seems, all in until he's then, and presumably shortly afterwards. They have increased the intensity of the fighting in the Russo-Ukrainian war along the front. Their reported or estimated losses, not that Russia reports any of its losses in reality, but what's estimates their losses has actually increased at a time when their currency is starting to lose value and other parts of the economy look extremely weak, like as we see in the Russian media when discussing the real inflation rate on cost of living for ordinary Russians. So that is today's video. I am very curious to see what happens in the next few weeks about where the Russian ruble will go and what this means for Russia's ability to continue the Russo-Ukrainian war at this intense level. It is the biggest war in Europe since World War II, and estimated casualties combining both sides plus civilians who have been killed or injured is over 1 million, along with combatants. So, and there's probably well north of $1 trillion or euros worth of damage that has been caused by this war. So it is pretty horrific, and Russia's ability to continue it is to a large extent dependent on the economic situation within Russia. So leave it at that for today's video. Drop a comment down below what you think of the exchange rate, the forex numbers, the inflation rate, and the state of the Russian economy. I will make some more videos on different aspects of this going forward in the next few weeks as we see what happens economically in Russia. So, do побачення.